I died at 32, and my last thought was that I'd wasted my entire life protecting someone who never deserved it. The truck's horn was still echoing in my ears when I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. My mother was crying beside my bed, but she looked wrong. Younger, her hair still dark brown instead of the gray I remembered from yesterday. My hands looked strange too, smaller, the scar from my wedding ring gone. "Thank God you're awake," she sobbed. "The doctor said you might not make it through the surgery." Surgery. I remembered this surgery. I was 16. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an old model I hadn't seen in years. The date glowed on the screen. April 15th, 16 years ago. The appendectomy that had nearly killed me. The beginning of everything. I started laughing, then crying, then laughing again until my mother called for the nurse. They sedated me, but my mind was racing. I'd gone back. Somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance. Sent back to the exact moment where everything started going wrong. Because 3 days from now, my older sister Claire would kill someone, and she'd convince me to take the blame. In my first life, I'd said yes. I'd stood in that courtroom at 16 years old and sworn under oath that I was the one driving the car that hit Marcus Chen, that I was the one who'd been drinking, that I was the one who ran the red light and killed a 23-year-old graduate student on his way home from the library. I'd lied to save my sister, and it had destroyed me. But this time, I knew the truth. I knew exactly what Claire had done, how she'd manipulated me, how she'd built her perfect life on the foundation of my ruined one. And this time, I was going to tell the truth and watch her burn. The next morning, I was released from the hospital. My father picked us up, Dad, who would have a heart attack from stress 2 years into my original prison sentence. He looked so healthy, so happy, completely unaware that in 72 hours his golden child was going to commit vehicular manslaughter and his younger daughter was going to confess to the crime. Not this time. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, helping me into the car. "Better," I said, and meant it. For the first time in 16 years, or was it 3 days? I felt clarity, purpose. Claire was waiting at home, 20 years old and radiant, home from college for the weekend. She'd always been beautiful, tall, blonde, effortlessly graceful, where I was short and awkward. Everyone loved Claire. Everyone trusted her. "My poor baby sister," she cooed, hugging me carefully. "Mom said you were really sick." I hugged her back, remembering every moment of the life she'd stolen from me. The trial, the juvenile detention center that became adult prison when I turned 18. The way she'd visited me twice in 6 years, both times to ask for favors. How she'd married a lawyer, had 2 perfect children, built a career as a child psychologist, all while I rotted in a cell for her crime. "I'm fine now," I said sweetly. Everything's going to be different." She laughed, not understanding. How could she? I spent the next 2 days preparing. In my first life, I'd been a stupid, lovesick 16-year-old who worshipped her older sister and believed everything she said. This time, I had knowledge, and knowledge was power. I knew that on April 18th at 11:47 p.m., Claire would sneak out of the house to meet her boyfriend, Jason Reeves. I knew they'd drive to a party in his neighborhood, that she'd drink 4 vodka sodas and insist she was fine to drive home. I knew that at 1:23 a.m. she'd run a red light at the intersection of Maple and 7th Street, and her BMW would strike Marcus Chen's bicycle at 45 miles per hour. I knew that Marcus would die on impact, that Claire would panic, that she'd call me sobbing from Jason's phone because she was too drunk to work her own. I knew that she'd beg me to say I was driving, that I'd taken the car without permission, that I'd been the one drinking. I knew that I'd believed her when she said we'd fix it later, that we'd tell the truth once things calmed down, that she just needed time to think. I knew that later never came. But I also knew something else, something I'd learned during my 6 years in prison: the legal system. I'd studied every day in that cell, devouring law books because I'd had nothing else, becoming an expert in the very system that had convicted me. I'd understood eventually exactly how Claire had trapped me and why I could never escape. This time, I was going to use that knowledge. On April 18th, I waited. I pretended to be the naive girl I'd been, stayed in my room playing video games, acted like everything was normal. At 11:30 p.m., I heard Claire's window slide open. I waited 15 minutes, then crept into her room. Her laptop was still on, password unchanged. She'd always been careless about security. I knew her email password, her social media passwords, every password she used because she'd never imagined her little sister would need to access her accounts. I started collecting evidence, screenshots of text messages between her and Jason about the party, her calendar showing she'd planned to attend, emails confirming the address. I created a new email account and forwarded everything to myself, then deleted all traces of what I'd done. Then I went to my father's office and took his old camcorder, the one he used to film family vacations. I'd thought of everything. At 1:15 a.m., my phone rang. Claire, hysterical. Emma, please, I need help. I hit someone. I hit someone with the car and he's not moving and there's blood everywhere. Where are you? I kept my voice steady, playing the role perfectly. Maple and 7th. Please, I can't go to jail. I can't. Jason left, he just drove away and I don't know what to do. Stay there. I'm coming. I dressed. Quickly grabbed the camcorder and took my bike. The intersection was a 10-minute ride from our house. I knew because I'd made this trip in my first life, arriving to find Claire sitting on the curb, her hands shaking, mascara running down her face. This time was the same, except I was prepared. Marcus Chen's body lay in the street, his bicycle crumpled beneath him. Claire's BMW sat at an angle, its front end smashed, radiator fluid leaking onto the asphalt. No one else was around. It was a quiet neighborhood, and the collision had happened at the intersection's blind spot where the streetlight had been out for weeks. I'd remembered that detail during my trial. The prosecution had used it against me, suggesting I'd chosen this intersection specifically because I knew there were no cameras. Emma, Claire ran to me, grabbing my shoulders. You have to help me, please. They'll send me to prison. Tell me what happened. I was at Jason's party and I had a few drinks, but I wasn't drunk. I swear I wasn't drunk. I was driving home and this guy just came out of nowhere on his bike and I didn't see him and... She dissolved into sobs. I'd heard this story before. In my first life, I'd believed every word. Listen to me, she said, gripping my arm so hard it hurt. You have to say you were driving. You're 16. They'll go easy on you. Juvenile record. It gets sealed when you turn 18, but I'm 20. I'll go to adult prison. It'll ruin my life. Please, Emma, I'm your sister. You're the only person I can trust. I stared at her, this beautiful, selfish creature who'd destroyed my life without a second thought. Okay, I said quietly. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll make this right, I promise. We'll tell the truth later, once things settle down. No, I interrupted. We won't, she blinked. What? I raised the camcorder, which I'd been recording since I arrived. I said we won't tell the truth later because we're going to tell it now. Her face went white. Emma, what are you... Put that down. You killed Marcus Chen, I said clearly, making sure the camera caught every word. You were drinking at Jason Reeves's party. You drove drunk, ran a red light, and struck him with your car. Then you called me and asked me to take the blame. Stop it! Turn that off! Why? Worried someone might see it? I kept filming as she lunged for the camera. I sidestepped easily. I'd spent 6 years working out in prison, and this body might be 16, but my mind remembered every self-defense move I'd learned. Don't worry, Claire. This video is just insurance. I'll keep it safe. You can't do this to me. I'm your sister. You're a murderer who was going to let a child go to prison for your crime. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the crash and called 911. Claire's expression changed, hardening into something ugly. Listen to me very carefully, Emma. If you don't help me, I'll make sure Mom and Amas, Dad know what a selfish, vindictive little bitch you really are. I'll tell them you've always been jealous of me, that you're lying for attention. They'll believe me. They always believe me. In my first life, that threat had worked. I'd been terrified of disappointing our parents, of being the bad daughter instead of the good one. But I'd already been the bad daughter. I'd already lost everything. I had nothing left to fear. Try it, I said. The police arrived minutes later. 2 squad cars, an ambulance, officers with flashlights examining the scene. One of them approached us. Officer Delgado, I remembered her. She'd testified at my trial, described how she'd found me sitting next to the body, crying, claiming I'd been driving. "Are you girls okay?" she asked. "Was anyone in the vehicle?" "My sister was," I said, pointing at Claire. "She called me after the accident. She's drunk." "What? No, she's lying!" Claire shrieked. "Aben, I wasn't even here." "She took my car without permission." "Breathalyzer test," I said calmly. "Give her a breathalyzer test right now before the alcohol metabolizes any further." Officer Delgado looked between us, then radioed for the equipment. Within minutes, they were testing Claire, who kept screaming about how I was a liar, how I'd stolen her car, how she'd been home asleep. The breathalyzer read .09, over the legal limit. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Delgado began. I watched them handcuff my sister, load her into the back of the squad car. She stared at me through the window, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She couldn't understand how her stupid little sister had outmaneuvered her, but I wasn't that little sister anymore. The EMTs confirmed what I already knew. Marcus Chen was dead. They covered his body with a sheet, and I looked away. In my first life, I'd learned his name during the trial. I'd learned he was 23, a PhD candidate in biochemistry, engaged to be married. I'd learned his fiance's name was Sarah, and that she'd sat in the courtroom every day, staring at me with hollow eyes. I'd learned all of this while pretending I was the one who'd killed him, and the guilt had nearly destroyed me. This time, the guilt would belong to the right person. The police took my statement at the station. I told them everything: the party, the drinking, the phone call, Claire's demand that I take the blame. I gave them the camcorder with its recording. I told them about Jason Reeves, gave them his address and phone number. "That's a very serious accusation," the detective said. Detective Morrison, a tired-looking man with gray hair. "You understand that making a false statement to police is a crime?" "I'm telling the truth," I said. "Check my sister's blood alcohol level. Check Jason Reeves's house for witnesses to the party. Check the text messages on her phone. The evidence is all there." He studied me for a long moment. "You're pretty calm for a 16-year-old whose sister just got arrested for vehicular manslaughter." "My sister is a murderer who tried to frame me for her crime," I said. "I'm exactly as calm as I should be." They kept me for hours, asking the same questions in different ways, trying to trip me up. But I'd spent 6 years in prison learning how investigations worked. I knew every trick, every tactic. I kept my story consistent, provided evidence for every claim, never wavered. Finally, they let me call my parents. Mom answered on the first ring. "Emma, baby, where are you? The police called and said there was an accident." "I'm at the station." "Claire killed someone, Mom. She was driving drunk and hit a man on a bicycle." "He's dead." Silence. Then, "What are you talking about? Claire's at home." "No, she's not. She's here. They arrested her." "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake. She did it. And then she tried to make me take the blame." But I told the truth instead. Another long silence. I could hear my father's voice in the background, urgent and confused. "We're coming to get you," Mom finally said, her voice shaking. "Don't say anything else until we get there." They arrived within 30 minutes, rushing into the police station like their lives were on fire. Mom grabbed me, checking me over for injuries, while Dad demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. Detective Morrison emerged from the back. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, we need to talk about your daughter." "Where is Claire?" Dad demanded. What's going on?" "Claire Patterson has been arrested for vehicular manslaughter while driving under the influence," Morrison said. "Your younger daughter, Emma, has provided evidence suggesting that Claire attempted to coerce her into taking responsibility for the crime." Mom's face went pale. No, that can't be right. Claire would never. Emma, tell them they're wrong." I looked at my mother, this woman who'd always loved Claire more, who'd always believed Claire's lies, who'd chosen Claire over me every single time. She did it, I said. She killed Marcus Chen and she tried to make me confess to save her. But I'm not going to lie for her anymore. Anymore? Dad caught the word. What do you mean anymore? I almost laughed. In my first life, I'd said yes immediately. There was no anymore. But the phrasing had slipped out, a remnant of my future memories. I mean, I'm not going to lie at all, I corrected. Not now, not ever. They took me home eventually, but the house felt different. Wrong. Mom cried all night. Dad made phone calls to lawyers, his voice getting louder and angrier with each conversation. I stayed in my room listening to them argue about what to do. Emma's lying, Mom kept saying. She has to be lying. Maybe she's jealous. Maybe she's angry about something. The breathalyzer test doesn't lie, Dad shot back. Claire was drunk. She was at that party. The evidence, fake. It could all be fake. Emma could have set this up somehow. She's 16 years old, Carol. How would she set up a false blood alcohol test? But Mom wasn't listening. She'd already made up her mind about who to believe. The next morning, Claire's lawyer arrived, Richard Somerset, the same attorney who'd defended me in my original trial. I'd hated him then, watched him paint me as a reckless teenager who'd made a stupid mistake. Now he was working for Claire, and I knew exactly how he operated. We're going to fight this, he told my parents, sitting in our living room while I eavesdropped from the stairs. The prosecution's case relies heavily on Emma's testimony, but we can discredit her. She's a troubled teenager, jealous of her older sister, acting out for attention. That's ridiculous, Dad interrupted. Emma's never been in trouble in her life. Then we'll suggest she had a grudge over something else. A boyfriend, maybe, or college money. The jury doesn't need to know why she's lying, just that she is lying. She's not lying, Dad said firmly. I've reviewed the evidence, the video, the text messages, the witnesses from the party. It all supports Emma's version of events. Then we'll suppress the video. Claim it was obtained illegally. She's our daughter, Dad exploded. We're not going to put Emma on trial to save Claire. Then you're going to let Claire go to prison, Somerset said coldly. Because that's what happens if we don't fight this. Your daughter will be convicted of vehicular manslaughter. She'll get 5 to 10 years minimum, possibly more given the circumstances. Her life will be over. Mom started crying again. I slipped back to my room before anyone could see me. The next few weeks were a nightmare, but a different nightmare than before. In my first life, I'd been the one arrested, fingerprinted, charged. I'd been the one standing in court while they read the charges against me. This time, I watched Claire go through it all, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. The prosecution built their case quickly. Marcus Chen's death had made local news, graduate student killed by drunk driver, and the DA wanted to make an example. They had Claire's blood alcohol test, the video I'd recorded, text messages between her and Jason about the party, and my testimony. Jason Reeves, predictably, flipped immediately. He confirmed Claire had been drinking at his party and that he'd left the scene when she called him crying about hitting someone. His lawyer negotiated a deal, probation in exchange for testimony. Claire's lawyer tried to have my video suppressed, but the judge ruled it was admissible. I'd been recording in a public space, documenting a crime in progress, and Claire's statements were voluntary. Everything was legal. The trial was set for 6 months later. In my first life, I'd never made it to trial. I'd taken a plea deal, admitted guilt, accepted a reduced sentence of 3 to 5 years. But Claire refused to plead guilty. She maintained her innocence, insisted I was lying, claimed she'd been home asleep when the accident happened. Mom supported her completely. She stopped speaking to me, started treating me like a stranger in our own house. She'd leave meals for Dad and Claire, but not for me. She'd do their laundry, but not mine. She acted like I'd betrayed the family, like I was the villain in this story. Dad tried to mediate, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. The stress, the divided loyalty, the public scrutiny. In my first life, this stress had killed him. I was determined not to let that happen again. Dad, I said one evening, finding him in his office, I need to talk to you. He looked up from his paperwork. Bills, medical expenses, lawyer fees. What is it, sweetheart? I know this is hard. I know Mom blames me. But I did the right thing. I know you did. He smiled sadly. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. Claire made her choice when she decided to drive drunk. She made it again when she tried to frame me. This isn't my fault. Your mother doesn't see it that way. Mom never sees anything that reflects badly on Claire. The words came out bitter. She never has. Dad sighed. Your mother loves you both. She's just having trouble accepting what Claire did. She'll have to accept it eventually. I paused. Have you thought about what happens after the trial? What do you mean? If Claire is convicted, she'll go to prison. Mom will need support. You'll need support. This family is going to fall apart if we're not careful. He looked at me strangely. You sound very mature for 16. I almost laughed. I was 32. I'd lived through this once already, watched my family crumble under the weight of my imprisonment. I knew exactly what was coming. I'm just trying to think ahead, I said. The trial began in October. I'd turned 17 by then, started my senior year of high school. The media coverage was intense. Sister testifies against sister in fatal DUI case. I ignored it all, focused on getting through each day. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Chen's fiancée, attended every hearing. She looked the same as I remembered from my first life, blonde, thin, eyes red from crying. But this time, when she looked at me, there was no accusation, just grief. During a recess, she approached me in the hallway. You're Emma, right? She asked. Claire's sister? Yes. I wanted to thank you. Her voice cracked. For telling the truth. For making sure the person who killed Marcus faces justice. I wanted to tell her that I knew how she felt, that I'd lived with the guilt of Marcus's death for 6 years, even though I hadn't caused it. That I'd thought about her every day in prison, imagined what she must think of me, but I couldn't say any of that without sounding insane. I'm sorry for your loss, I said instead. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He was going to propose on my birthday next month. He'd already bought the ring. My throat tightened. I hadn't known that. Detail. I'm so sorry. Your sister took everything from me. Sarah's expression hardened. I hope she rots in prison for what she did. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I agreed? That I'd orchestrated this specifically so Claire would face consequences? The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. The breathalyzer test, the video recording, Jason Reeves's testimony, text messages, cell phone records, showing Claire's location at the time of the accident. They brought in accident reconstruction experts who testified that the BMW had been traveling at 45 miles per hour and that the driver had run a red light. Claire's lawyer tried to create reasonable doubt. He suggested I'd fabricated evidence, that I'd somehow gotten Claire drunk and staged the accident to frame her. He implied I was mentally unstable, attention-seeking, jealous of my perfect older sister. When I took the stand, he went after me aggressively. Emma, isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your sister? Somerset asked. No, I said calmly. Didn't you resent how your parents favored her? I don't know that they did favor her. Come now, Claire is beautiful, successful, popular. You're ordinary. That must have been difficult. Objection, the prosecutor said. Relevance? Sustained, the judge agreed. Ms. Somerset, get to the point. My point, Somerset said, turning back to me, is that you had motive to lie about your sister. Isn't it possible that you made this entire story up to hurt her? No, I said. Because I have evidence. Evidence you claim to have collected the night of the accident. How convenient. It's not convenient, it's true. But we only have your word for that, don't we? You could have created that video any time. You could have manufactured the text messages. The text messages were pulled directly from Claire's phone by the police, I interrupted. I didn't manufacture anything. The evidence speaks for itself. The evidence, Somerset said coldly, Buzz, shows that you're a manipulative young woman willing to destroy her own sister for attention. Objection, the prosecutor stood, badgering the witness. Withdrawn. Somerset smiled. No further questions. I stepped down, made eye contact with Claire. She looked pale, drawn, nothing like the radiant college student I remembered. Prison was going to eat her alive. Good. The prosecution called their final witness, me again, but this time for closing testimony. They asked me to describe the moment Claire called me that night, begging for help. She said she'd hit someone and didn't know what to do, I testified. She was crying. She said Jason had left her alone. She begged me to say I was driving because I was a minor and would get a lighter sentence. And did you agree to lie for her? Initially, yes, she's my sister. I wanted to help her. What changed your mind? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I realized that if lied, an innocent man would have died for nothing. Marcus Chen deserved justice, his family deserved the truth, and my sister deserved to face consequences for her actions. Even though those consequences meant prison? Especially because they meant prison. That's where people who kill others while driving drunk belong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood us. On the charge of vehicular manslaughter while operating a vehicle under the influence, we find the defendant, Claire Patterson, guilty. Mom screamed. Dad closed his eyes. Claire collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Sarah Mitchell, sitting in the front row, whispered, "Thank you." The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Claire's lawyer begged for leniency. She was young, it was her first offense. She'd made a terrible mistake, but didn't deserve to have her life ruined. He brought in character witnesses who testified about what a good person she was, how much she'd contributed to her community, how promising her future had been. The prosecutor countered with Marcus Chen's family. His mother, his father, Sarah, his younger brother. They each spoke about what they'd lost, the future Marcus would never have, the hole his death had left in their lives. When it was time for Claire to address the court, she stood trembling. "Your Honor, I'm so sorry for what happened," she said, her voice shaking. "I never meant to hurt anyone. It was an accident. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Please, I'm begging you, show me mercy." The judge looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Patterson, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices. You chose to drink. You chose to drive. You chose to run a red light. And when you killed Marcus Chen, you chose to try to frame your 16-year-old sister for your crime." Claire paled. "That last choice," the judge continued, "demonstrates a level of selfishness and moral bankruptcy that concerns this court deeply. You were willing to let a child go to prison to save yourself. That's not a mistake. That's a character flaw." "Your Honor," Somerset tried to interrupt, "I'm not finished." The judge's voice was steel. Emma Patterson did something extraordinarily difficult. She chose justice over family loyalty. She chose truth over convenience. She did the right thing at great personal cost, and for that, she has my respect and my gratitude. I felt tears prick my eyes. In my first life, a judge had looked at me with contempt, called me reckless and irresponsible, sent me to prison without a second thought. Hearing these words felt surreal. "Claire Patterson," the judge said, "I hereby sentence you to 10 years in the California Department of Corrections with possibility of parole after 7 years. 10 years. The same sentence I'd served in my first life, but Claire had killed someone while drunk. I'd supposedly done the same, but was 16. The math worked out. Claire crumpled. Somerset caught her before she hit the floor. Bailiffs moved in to restrain her as she screamed about how it wasn't fair, how I'd ruined her life, how I was a liar and a traitor. Mom was sobbing. Dad looked devastated. Sarah Mitchell looked relieved. I felt nothing. Just a cold, satisfied certainty that justice had finally been served. They took Claire away in handcuffs. I watched her go, this stranger who wore my sister's face, and thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. 16 years old, terrified, willing to sacrifice everything for someone who didn't deserve it. I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd died and been reborn, and in my second life, I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen truth. I'd chosen justice. I'd chosen myself. And Claire would spend the next decade learning what I'd already learned, that actions have consequences, that lies eventually unravel, and that the truth, however painful, is the only foundation worth building a life on. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. Emma, how do you feel about your sister's sentence? Do you regret testifying against her? What do you want to say to Marcus Chen's family? I ignored them all, pushed through the crowd to where Dad was waiting. He put his arm around me, guided me to the car. Let's go home, he said quietly. Mom refused to ride with us. She stayed behind with Somerset, probably discussing appeals, clemency, some way to reduce Claire's sentence. She still didn't believe her golden child could have done something so horrible. But she'd have 10 years to come to terms with it. The drive home was silent. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad turned to me. I'm proud of you, he said. I know this was hard. I know your mother is angry, but you did the right thing. I know. Are you okay? I thought about that question. In my first life, I'd never been okay again after that night. I'd spent 6 years in prison, then another 10 years trying to rebuild a life from nothing. I'd died alone and bitter, convinced I'd wasted everything. But now I was 17 with my whole life ahead of me. I was free. I was vindicated. I'd saved my father from a stress-induced heart attack. I'd given Marcus Chen's family justice. I'd proved that truth mattered more than family loyalty. Yeah, I said, I'm okay. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I actually meant it. The next few months were difficult. Mom barely spoke to me, spent most of her time either working or visiting Claire in prison. Dad tried to maintain peace, but the house felt fractured, broken beyond repair. I focused on school, on my future. In my first life, I dropped out of high school after my arrest, eventually got my GED in prison, but never went to college. This time, I was determined to do better. I applied to universities with strong pre-law programs. I'd spent 6 years studying law in prison. Why not make a career of it? I could help people, fight for the wrongly accused, be the kind of lawyer I'd wished I'd had. My guidance counselor was shocked. Pre-law? Emma, that's ambitious. Are you sure? I'm sure. It's just with everything that's happened with your sister, don't you think studying law might be painful? I think it might be exactly what I need. I got into UCLA with a full scholarship. When the acceptance letter arrived, Dad cried. Mom said nothing. Claire called from prison that night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Emma? Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. It's me. I know. I wanted to tell you that I hate you, that I'll never forgive you for what you did to me. Okay. You ruined my life. No, I said calmly. You ruined your life when you decided to drive drunk. You ruined it again when you tried to frame me for murder. I just made sure you faced consequences for your choices. I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister the moment you asked a 16-year-old to go to prison for you. Silence. Then, was it worth it? Destroying your family for some stranger? I thought about Marcus Chen, about Sarah Mitchell's devastated face, about the life he'd never get to live because my sister had been selfish and reckless. Yes, I said, it was worth it. She hung up. I never heard from her again. High school graduation came and went. I gave the valedictorian speech, something I'd never done in my first life because I'd been in prison. I talked about truth, about doing the right thing even when it's hard, about choosing justice over comfort. Mom didn't attend. Dad sat in the front row, beaming. After the ceremony, Sarah Mitchell approached me. I hadn't seen her since the trial, hadn't expected to ever see her again. Congratulations, she said. I heard you got into UCLA. Marcus would have been happy. He believed in education. Thank you. I wanted to give you this. She handed me a small box. Inside was a bracelet, simple, silver. with a small charm shaped like a bicycle. Marcus wore this every day. I wanted you to have it. I can't. Please, you gave me justice. Let me give you this. I took the bracelet, slipped it onto my wrist. It felt like a promise, a reminder of why truth mattered. What are you doing now? I asked. I'm finishing my degree in social work. I want to help families of drunk driving victims. She smiled sadly. Trying to make meaning out of tragedy, I guess. That's admirable. We do what we can to survive, right? Right. We hugged, this woman who'd lost everything because of my sister, and I felt the weight of my first life lifting slightly. I'd made things right. Not perfect. Marcus was still dead, Sarah was still grieving, but right. I started at UCLA in the fall. Pre-law, full scholarship, a chance to build the life I'd never had. I threw myself into my studies, worked harder than anyone else, fueled by memories of 6 years wasted in a cell. Dad visited me every month, bringing care packages and news from home. Mom had filed for divorce. She blamed him for not defending Claire hard enough, for believing me over his older daughter. He looked tired but relieved, like he'd finally been released from something that was slowly killing him. How is she? I asked, meaning Claire. Adjusting. Her lawyer filed an appeal, but it was denied. She'll serve the full 10 years unless she gets parole. And Mom? Still convinced you're lying, she started a website calling for Claire's release, claiming you fabricated evidence. He shook his head. I've stopped arguing with her. Some people can't accept reality. I wasn't surprised. Mom had always seen what she wanted to see when it came to Claire. 3 years into my undergraduate degree, I got a letter from the parole board. Claire was eligible for early release. She'd been a model prisoner, participated in every program available, expressed remorse for her actions. They wanted my opinion on her parole. I sat in my dorm room staring at the letter, remembering my first life. I'd served 6 years, been paroled early for good behavior. I'd walked out of prison at 22 with nothing, no education, no job prospects, no family support. I'd struggled for a decade, worked minimum wage jobs, lived in terrible apartments, watched the world move on without me. Claire had been free that whole time, living the life that should have been mine. Did I want her to experience the same? Did I want revenge? No, I wanted justice. And justice meant that Claire served appropriate time for killing someone. Not my time, her time. I wrote to the parole board recommending denial. I explained that 3 years wasn't enough for vehicular manslaughter, that Claire had shown no remorse at trial, that her model prisoner behavior might be manipulation rather than genuine change. The board agreed. Claire's parole was denied. She wrote me a letter after that, full of rage and accusations. I burned it without reading past the first paragraph. I graduated summa cum laude, got into Stanford Law. The acceptance letter felt like vindication, proof that I'd made the right choice, that truth had been worth defending. Dad attended my law school graduation 3 years later. He looked older but healthier, remarried to a kind woman who'd helped him heal from his divorce. He told me Mom was still campaigning for Claire's release, had become something of a minor celebrity in wrongful conviction circles. She'll never accept what Claire did, he said. I know. Does that bother you? I thought about it. In my first life, Mom's rejection had destroyed me. I'd craved her approval, her love, her belief that I was good and worthy. But this time, I had something better. I had the truth. I had justice. I had a life built on my own choices rather than someone else's lies. No, I said honestly. It doesn't bother me anymore. I passed the bar exam on my first try, got a job at a nonprofit law firm specializing in criminal defense. I worked with the wrongly accused, the people who'd been coerced into false confessions, the victims of police misconduct. I understood them in a way few lawyers could because I'd almost been one of them. Claire got out after 7 years, paroled despite my objection. She moved across the country, changed her name, tried to start over. Mom went with her. Dad sent me a text. They're gone. House feels empty but peaceful. I didn't contact Claire. Didn't seek her out. Didn't try to reconcile. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. Our paths had diverged 16 years ago when she'd tried to frame me for murder, and there was no going back. 5 years after law school, I took a case that made national news. A woman accused of killing her abusive husband, claiming self-defense, facing murder charges because the prosecutor didn't believe her. The evidence was murky, the witnesses contradictory, the truth buried under layers of lies and trauma. I won. The jury acquitted her in 3 hours. After the verdict, a journalist approached me for an interview. "Ms. Patterson, you've built quite a reputation for defending the accused. What drives you?" I thought about that night 16 years ago, standing at the intersection of Maple and 7th Street with a camcorder in my hand. About the choice I'd made to tell the truth, even when everyone wanted me to lie. "I believe everyone deserves justice," I said. "Not just the victims, but the accused, too. Someone needs to fight for the truth, no matter how complicated or uncomfortable it is." That's a bold stance. It's the only stance worth taking. The interview aired that night. The next morning, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. "I saw you on TV. I wanted to say thank you for what you did all those years ago. Marcus would have been proud of who you've become. Sarah." I smiled, touched the silver bracelet I still wore every day. That afternoon, my phone rang, unknown number. "Emma?" The voice was older, rougher, but still recognizable. "It's Claire." I should have hung up, should have blocked the number and moved on with my life. But curiosity won. "What do you want?" "I saw your interview. Saw you talking about truth and justice." She laughed bitterly. "Do you feel good about yourself? You destroyed my life." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed your own life. I just refused to let you destroy mine too." "I was 20 years old. I made a mistake." "You killed someone. Then you tried to frame a child for it. That's not a mistake. That's evil. I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister 16 years ago." Silence. Then, quietly, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd helped me? If you'd taken the blame like I asked?" Every day. Every single day I thought about my first life, about the 6 years I'd spent in prison for her crime, about the decade of struggling afterward. "Yes," I said to me, "I think about it constantly, and every time I'm grateful I made a different choice." I spent 7 years in prison because of you. You spent 7 years in prison because you killed someone while driving drunk. Take responsibility for your actions, Claire. I'll never forgive you. Good. I don't want your forgiveness. I want you to live with what you did. She hung up. I blocked the number. That night, I sat in my apartment, a nice place filled with law books and case files and framed photos of Dad and his new family. I looked around at the life I'd built, the career I'd earned, the justice I'd served. In my first life, I'd died believing I'd wasted everything. But this time, I'd made different choices. I'd chosen truth over loyalty, justice over comfort, myself over my sister's manipulation, and I'd built something worth living for. The silver bracelet caught the light, and I thought about Marcus Chen, about the life he'd never gotten to live, about Sarah Mitchell, who'd turned her grief into purpose, about every person I'd helped through my work, every truth I'd fought to defend. This was what my second chance had been for. Not revenge, though that had been satisfying, but justice. Real, meaningful justice for people who deserved it. I'd been given an impossible gift, a chance to go back and fix my greatest mistake. And I'd used it to become someone worthy of that gift. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. "Saw your interview. So proud of you, sweetheart. Dinner this weekend?" I smiled, typed back, "Absolutely, love you." In the reflection of my phone screen, I saw myself, 33 years old chronologically, 17 years into my second life, and finally free. They'd made me lie in court to save her. After Rebirth, I told the truth and she got 10 years, and I got my life back. I got justice. I got everything I deserved.